Hi there, Patrick Peace here again. I'm looking at chapter 11 from The Selfish Gene in the book by Richard Dawkins. Now, this chapter 11, is really quite remarkable because the first 10 chapters I've been, getting all out of joint because I've disagreed with so much of what Dawkins has written. And finally, it's unbelievable. Finally, in chapter 11, it comes clean in a sense and admits that the previous 10 chapters of the book are lacking in substance, for want of a better word, or dismissible, you could say. He admits that in chapter 11. It's incredible. He starts off by saying, so far he says, I've talked about, the term survival machine. Remember I was talking about how survival machine was such a harsh term to use, and that's what he described humans as. They're just simply survival machines for genes or DNA. And now he says, well, is there is there something where there could be an exception? Is there possibility for a species to be unique? And he says, well, I believe the answer is, can humans be unique in that they don't follow this strictly survival machine description? And he says yes. He says humans can be exempt from that. And not only humans, he gives an example of a bird called the saddleback bird. So he goes through and he says what's most about unusual of humans, he says, can be described as culture. And he says, I use the word culture in a special sense, not in a snobbish sense, but as a scientist would use it, whatever that means. So he says now there's a different thing that causes evolution, not just the survival machine and the genes, but another thing that causes evolution, or is a source of evolution, is a thing called culture. So he starts chapter 11 by this, and he goes on to say that there's these birds near New Zealand that are able to learn new songs that previous generations didn't know, so they can't be evolved, and they learn them from the time they're born. They communicate with each other, and once in a while they'll learn new songs just spontaneously on their own. So he has to have another way to explain that, right? It's just really a total 180-degree shift in his attitude. He's saying now that things can evolve by non-genetic means. In fact, he says we may have to start again and go right back to first principles. In other words, he says everything I said in the previous 10 chapters, starting from chapter 1, maybe that's wrong. Maybe I have to go and start all over again. He admits that. He admits that in the book, in chapter 11. So I write it down. It's remarkable. I mean, this is very significant for a book that's survived for 30 years and is referenced very often. And the author himself is saying, he says here in page 191, I think we have got to start again and go right back to first principles. Look at this sentence that he mentions here. He says, the argument I shall advance, surprising as it may seem, coming from the author of the earlier chapters. He's referring to himself in the third person. He says, there's this guy who wrote these previous 10 chapters. Don't know who it was. Might have been Richard Dawkins, I guess. But that guy, coming from the author of the earlier chapters, this is quite surprising. But I'm going to start over again, and I'm going to start with a new principle. Understanding that we must begin by throwing out the gene as the sole basis of our ideas on evolution. This is what Dawkins himself says. He says we must begin by throwing out the gene as the sole basis of our ideas on evolution. And he basically spent the first 10 chapters expounding upon that theory or that argument that he put forward as an explanation for his version of evolution, or why we're here, or how humans evolved, he calls it, right? The gene will enter my thesis as an analogy, nothing more. So he said that. So what's so special about genes? He goes on and he said, oh, okay, well, he's going to start something different. And it's mind-blowing that he would do that, right? Write a book, 10 chapters, and then the 11th chapter says, well, you know what? Maybe that doesn't work. Maybe we got to start all over again and start with something new. And the crazy thing, he starts out by saying, okay, so evolution must be possible through culture, and the way that it happens through culture, instead of a molecule or a DNA, it happens through memes. And he coins the term memes. Now, Dawkins is famous for being the guy who coined the phrase meme. And he describes a meme as, it could be a tune, an idea, a catchphrase, clothing, fashion, a way of making pots, or of building arches. This is what he describes a meme as. And of course, the term meme took off from there. And he says that the belief in life after death, or the idea of God, is just a meme that has some kind of permanence to it. It's really, really remarkable how he's at a 180-degree change. He's saying that the reason why belief in God continues or gets perpetuated is because he says it provides psychological value. Well, I would say that the meme persists, not because of the psychological value it provides, but because of the hard evidence that is given from a belief in God. This is why Christ himself said, if you don't believe me, even just believe the works. And I don't believe he could have been, but he wasn't necessarily referring just to the works that he did, the miracles that he did. But he's referring to the miracles that we see all the time, that we see every day. The persistence of a belief in God continues and exists because works continue to be visible. That's hard facts, hard evidence. When somebody is going to go on a flight and they get a feeling that they shouldn't go on that flight, and the plane crashes. I don't know about the other people that went on the plane, but for that particular person, that stays in their memory for the rest of their life. Or they're rescued from a car crash, or they have a car lifted off of them by an angel, or they get cured of some deadly disease. We don't know why everybody doesn't get healed, but for the ones that do experience an angelic intervention, a miraculous healing, they are healed from blindness. Many, many examples continue in every generation of works being viewed and evidenced as godly intervention. Of course, I've seen it in my own life. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't believe. But because of the direct first-hand experiences that I've had, there is no question in my mind that God exists. None whatsoever. Absolutely none. If you experience what feels like death, and you experience the spiritual realm, however that happens for many people in different ways. And now it's becoming quite popular when you listen to people like Joe Rogan. They say they experience some type of divine experience through the use of psychedelic drugs. It really doesn't matter. The fact that it remains is that there is a very strong, compelling body of evidence, scientific evidence, measurable evidence. Now, a lot of times it's evidence that has to be based on faith. And he is the one, actually, in this chapter, he brings up the story of doubting Thomas, right? He says that Thomas said, I'm not going to believe unless I can, physically touch Jesus. I refuse to believe. And he talks about that example. And he gets something totally different out of it, what a person of faith would get out of it, of course. But I'm just really blown away that this, that Richard Dawkins has done a 180 on his previous 10 chapters. So this 11th chapter is mind-blowing to me, because I thought he was just going to keep on and on and on with the same examples and the same theory and the DNA and the molecule, and he actually has the strength to abandon it. And he even mentions, let's see what else I've got written here. He even mentions that he says he used other people's ideas, like R.L. Trivers. He says, I didn't repeat them in my own words. He says, I took their ideas, and he goes, I've twisted them round for my own purposes, changing the emphasis, blending them with the ideas of my own and of other people. And then he calls this his own form of using memes, right? And then he even says, I appeal to the same verbal trick that I used in chapter 3. So here he says he admits to using verbal tricks. He admits to taking other people's words and twisting them round for his own purposes. Those are his exact words that he confesses in chapter 11. That's remarkable. So I got to give him credit for this particular chapter, because he's confessing a lot. Really, if you examine what he's saying here, it's like, wow, this guy has gone all to the trouble of putting together this clay structure, which totally collapses in chapter 11. And then he says, well, I probably have to start all over. I'll come up with some other ideas. Well, evolution can happen through memes then. And he has that same skill of taking other people's ideas, rearranging them down, using verbal tricks to present his arguments. And of course, his arguments also start to reveal why he needs to have these arguments in the first place, because of his problem with God. Right? He says, well, I got to dismiss God. I got to think of a way to dismiss it. Here's one way. We just say it's all just molecules and DNA. Oh, that's not working, because it's not explaining everything that we see evolutionarily, or what can evolve out of life that we see around us. He has no way to explain, you could say, the works of God. He has no way to explain that. So he's got to come up with another theory to explain it. Well, he's going to use the theory of memes this time. But each time he's mentioning back to, the story of Thomas. It does, and he shifts between using God with little g and God with big G. There's a lot in this chapter that I've only been able to read it. This is the first time I've read it, so it's going to take me a little bit of more time to dig through it and to reevaluate it. And I may have to do another video on chapter 11 alone. But for now, that's all I can say about it. I haven't gone through the footnotes and details on this chapter yet, so if necessary, I'll make another video on it. But for now, I'm going to leave it at that. A direct 180. The author coming clean, and I have to say, Richard Dawkins, from this particular chapter, God bless you, man. You actually, my view is changed from this particular thing, because you at least are admitting to a lot. You're not admitting to everything. You're still kicking against the pricks as usual, and you're still trying to poo-poo the idea of God and dismiss it as eloquently as you can. But I'm going to move on now to chapter 12, which is called Nice Guys Finish First. A very intriguing title. Chapter 12, Nice Guys Finish First. And I'll see what you have to say, because we only have 2 chapters left. But wow, kudos to you, Richard Dawkins. I'm surprised that you would. I'm surprised you didn't just close the book at the end of chapter 10 and say, okay, that's it. That's my theory. But this really shows that you've got some self-respect, and you've given me at least a sliver of hope of having some respect for you, which I do, because at least you're admitting to a lot of things that I wasn't expecting from reading the first 10 chapters. Put it that way. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you. If you're studying Richard Dawkins, I hope you find this video. I'm going to leave it posted publicly. I love you. Thank you for watching. Have a beautiful, blessed day. Take care now.